My name's Jenny Riffle, and I am a photographer and artist in Seattle, Washington.
So you've chosen Tanyth Berkeley's The Walking Woman. Could you tell me a little bit about what spoke to you about this book?
I first saw this book at my friend's house, and right away I loved the cover of it and was really drawn in because I think the image on the cover is a woman and she's half engulfed in light. It's this very sort of mystical, magical image.
So let's open it up. Berkeley has included this addendum and the story that was originally written by Mary Austin in 1907.
I think the way I experience books, and especially art books and photography books, is first I look through them and I don't read anything. So I didn't read that addendum or the text in the book, the story, the first time through it. In a way, I feel like I had three different experiences of the book.
Berkeley went west to photograph a woman who'd left the Fundamentalist Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, which is a polygamist sect of Mormonism. And this woman had been in the news wanting equal rights and rights for her children that were being denied to her within the church. And so she ended up leaving the church. And so these photographs are of the woman wearing the clothes, the prairie dresses that women in this sect are required to wear. So it immediately feels like 19th century, but these are contemporary images that reflect this a contemporary woman's life.
Yes, and I think that added to me to this sort of mystical quality of the images right away. Well, I couldn't quite place where in time it was coming from. So this image is a portrait of the woman, and she is kind of ghostly, or again, being touched with this otherworldly light. And it is a color image, I believe, but there's no color in it.
I love the mix of color and black and white and desaturated color because, like we were talking about before, it really confuses the sense of history and time.
Yes, definitely. And I think for this work too, it's this sort of adding up of history, having this old story that ties so well into these contemporary images.
I'm drawn to the story by Mary Austin also because I identify so strongly with the author or the narrator that she imagines, like because I'm a writer, but also because it makes me think of Tanyth Berkeley kind of searching out these stories and looking for, some kind of connection with other people, understanding how other people live their lives.
It's interesting because I think the writer is really trying to decide who this woman is, and there's sort of all these contradicting stories floating around in the world. And I think that's probably the same thing going to contemporary time and the woman that Tanyth is photographing. I think there's all these stories that are floating around, talking about her life. And so, wanting to go and figure out for herself who this woman is.
So this story that comes from the addendum also is related to Berkeley's experience. She went out to photograph this woman, Ruth, and Ruth worked with her for a while, was engaged in making portraits, and then disappeared and left a trunk of her clothes behind. And Berkeley spent the night, I think, camping out at a natural hot spring. And in the morning, she met another woman walking through the landscape, and she ended up working with that woman. So then following pictures we see are of the woman named Spice.
Is it a sunset and then a sunrise, or two sunsets? Either way, suddenly we're looking at a new woman.
And maybe the empty chair in the earlier image is like a foreshadowing.
Mm-hmm.
I think the first portrait of Spice is so much more objective than any of the portraits of Ruth earlier. This is that sense of her belonging in the landscape, if only just because of the color of her sweatsuit. She seems of a piece with it.
Absolutely. She fits so beautifully into the landscape, so perfectly with the color and even just the body language. I love the placement of those two going up across the two pages. Again, it sort of brings me back to the images that have the light flares in them. And it seems like somebody's reaching from the sky and, pulling her upwards, whether that's an alien or God or whatever it is. It looks like these are the same images, but I don't know if they're slightly different. But once you then turn the page, I love that. That's one of my favorite sequences in the book, where you go from the closed eyes to the open eyes.
Oh, these are incredible. I love also the choice to include two images, which are so nearly identical. It's a great challenge to spend more time with the image. So I think by the time you turn the page to this one, the shock is even greater. One of the captions says, women of the FLDS are told to, quote, keep sweet. And the pastels, as much as they're beautiful, they also feel sweet in an almost fake way.
Absolutely. I felt that too. Sort of like candy colored sweetness.
That feels like a real surprise to me that there's no figure in this landscape.
Yeah, I agree. Because I feel like the other landscapes that didn't have figures in them, they were more like washes of color or sunset or sunrise. And this one feels like there should be someone there, which is interesting, because then it's like, where did they go? Like they've walked out of the landscape.
Yeah, it's interesting, right? That the frame feels so all-encompassing that instead of imagining that she's out of the frame, we think she's disappeared.
Like, I feel like I can see the place where she's supposed to be standing.
Right.
And she's not there.
This whole story, again, makes me think about how Berkeley was interacting with the women and how they're interacting with each other, that Spice knows that she's impersonating, or at least, wearing the clothes of the woman who disappeared before her. There's this real feeling of trying to connect through any means, and that goes for the photographer as well as for the participants in the project.
Trying to connect on so many different levels. The women that are out in the landscape trying to connect with the land, and then the photographer trying to connect to the stories of these women and creating these images, and has connected both of the women in this story. Well, all three of the women, because we talk about the first woman of the story, the walking woman, and then these two women in the photo book. And now they, in this image, really all blend into one to me. This is like the last image of the book, and I see all of them in this image.
Thank you so much, Jenny, for introducing me to this book.
You're welcome. Thank you for talking about it with me.